Today on Monsters on Trial, the heartbreaking story of Jeffrey Baldwin. He was abused, starved, and tortured. Never shown love, pity, or remorse from his grandparents that abused him, and he was failed not only by his parents but CPS as well. On March 30th, 2002, Jeffrey's grandmother made a 911 call. Upon arriving, paramedics were faced with a disturbing scene. It was 5-year-old Jeffrey's emaciated, lifeless body. Jeffrey's siblings survived to tell the story of what really happened inside their grandparents' home. Jeffrey was born January 20th, 1997 in Toronto, Canada, to his mother Yvonne Kidman and father Richard Baldwin. He had 2 older sisters and a younger brother. His parents were young and troubled with allegations of abuse and violence, deeming them unfit to raise the 4 children. They lost custody in summer of 1998. Custody was given to the maternal grandparents, Elva Botano, who was a caregiver at the time, and Norman Kidman. Jeffrey and his sister were singled out as the bad kids. However, his oldest sister and younger brother were treated normally. After Jeffrey's death, his siblings were placed in foster care. Once they felt safe and comfortable enough, they opened up and began to talk about the agonizing pain and events they experienced. Pig was a common term used by Elva to refer to Jeffrey and his sister. A photograph of Jeffrey and his sister sitting in a corner showed what the children were describing as a pig wall. If and when they were fed, they ate leftovers from everyone else using a shared bowl called the pig bowl. That explained their malnourished bodies. They were very small for their age and had sores and distended bellies. Jeffrey and his sister spent all day and night locked in a room that had no access to sunlight, with the only window covered up and no heat because the vents were closed. They both never visited a doctor. Jeffrey never went to school like his other siblings. His grandparents' reasoning was that he wasn't potty trained and wouldn't get accepted. His siblings were told to not talk about or mention Jeffrey. Jeffrey and his sister couldn't play outside and had bright red skin from their urine sliding down their legs since they couldn't use a bathroom. They lived in their own feces. Their room had a very strong smell that would stick to anyone's clothes that would walk out, described a detective. When their mattress they slept on was squeezed, urine would come out. Elva would force them to clean their room, beds, and scrub the walls. And if they didn't do it good, she would hit them in the head with a mop and would yell, "Hurry up, you pigs." Norman would hit them with his hands, slippers, or newspapers. He would also spank them with a metal spoon. He would line them up and ask them to undress completely. When Jeffrey's sister questioned why he had them do that, he would say, so they wouldn't get blood on their clothes. They were let out the room to exercise, which meant they had to run around the kitchen. If they stopped, they were thrown objects and called pig and other abusive slurs. They weren't only deprived of food, but also water. They would drink out of the toilet bowl, and they would wash themselves with toilet water as told to do so by their grandmother. If they puked up food, they had to eat it. At school, his sister's teacher noticed she smelled like urine, and during snack time, she had a big appetite. Even with concerns, her teacher failed to report anything, and with the children's fear of speaking up, they had no one to rescue them. In the year 2000, a CPS worker made the first home visit where she noticed a bruise under Jeffrey's eye. Had she done her job, Jeffrey and his siblings would have been taken and he would be alive today. Instead, the bruise was dismissed as a small accident, and no investigation was made. The only time Jeffrey smiled was when his mom and dad visited, which was rare. They noticed their son's condition, and when Elva was questioned, she always had an excuse, stating he would be short because he ran in the family, and that his younger brother was outgrowing him because of the steroids in his eczema cream. Yvonne and Richard had no choice but to trust her. Elva told Jeffrey's parents he would drink out of the toilet, and when they confronted Elva, she said if they didn't like what they saw, they could leave. His sister described the day before he passed away. Elva wrapped him in a blanket and sat him in front of the TV, but he couldn't hold his head up. She thought maybe he was being lazy. He would crawl up the stairs from how weak he was to the second floor where his room was. His pajamas were literally falling off from him having no hips. November 30th, 2002, Jeffrey passed away due to his poor health conditions, his cause of death being a result of septic shock and bacterial pneumonia, but also from prolonged starvation and abuse. His body was covered in bruises, sores, and abrasions. He weighed 21 pounds, had no muscle tone or body fat. His clothes were falling off because of his skeletal body. He had ulcers in his privates, and a few days before his death, a fecal bacteria entered his bloodstream, causing septic shock that made it difficult for him to breathe. While Elva and Norman thought they had gotten away with the crime, they began to clean and paint the room Jeffrey and his sister were in, removing all the evidence. No one would guess what vile and evil things took place in the room. New beds with pillows and warm blankets were placed where the urine-filled mattresses once were. Elva and Norman had the audacity to remodel the room, thinking they would be welcoming the three children back home. On March 19, 2003, Elva and Richard were arrested and charged with second-degree murder of Jeffrey and forcible confinement of his sister. They showed no emotion or remorse when shown pictures of Jeffrey. CPS failed to run a background check on Elva and Richard that would show Elva had a child abuse conviction back in 1970 towards her own daughter, Eva, who was 5 months at the time. Eva had passed away of pneumonia in 1969, and after further investigation of her passing, it was discovered she had multiple fractures on her body. Elva only received a year of probation. In 1978, Norman was convicted of assaulting two of Elva's children from a previous relationship and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. The two children also experienced the same treatment as Jeffrey and his sister. The children were taken by the same people who helped the two get custody of the 4 children 2 decades later. The judge was told Elva and Norman would use the children to collect $600 per child. And on June 9, 2006, Elva Botana was sentenced to 22 years until 2028, while Norman Kidman was sentenced to 20 years until 2026, before they become eligible for parole.